Analyst Eric Woodring covers that company, as you know, from Morgan Stanley. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
There's something to this in China?
I think it's a kind of a reflection of the trends that we're seeing globally, right? Of course, some markets will be weaker, some will be stronger, but China has been a market that has been in decline for 7 to 8 years. Said differently, replacement cycles have elongated significantly in China. And we're seeing a product that resonates with Chinese consumers. There's also some subsidies in the market in China. So kind of right product at the right place at the right time. Again, I'm not sure I'd tell you that China has turned the corner for Apple. But don't forget, same as we talked last time, we should take the kind of September and December quarters together to get a reflection what's happening in China, because September was capacity constrained, and we're seeing some of that benefit flow over into December now.
I mean, let's be honest, like any number for the most part that's positive is going to look good from an extraordinarily low base, correct?
I completely agree. Again, this is good. I'm not trying to downplay that. My point is just I think what we're seeing in China is reflective of what is happening with the iPhone 17 more broadly, which is it's the right product that's resonating with the right price points.
So let me ask you this. I'm not going to ask you to comment on the report that we were just talking about of this memo circulating apparently from the White House that alleges Alibaba is helping the Chinese military target the U.S. Because it's not your bailiwick. I totally get that. However, if I told you that the relationship between the two countries has the risk of getting worse before it gets better, and there's a direct relationship between the companies that are in the United States that are highly reliant on the Chinese marketplace, like Apple is, which I think gets 20% of their revenues or thereabouts from China. If I told you that the relationship itself was going to further deteriorate because of reports like this, and you could no longer rely on China to give you anywhere close to that number that we have relied on, what would that do to the way you saw this company and what it was getting from there?
Sure. So, listen, you're correct in that Apple is very tied to China, both from a supply and a demand standpoint. I think it's 22% of revenue for Apple comes from China. So a kind of deterioration in geopolitics in the relationship between Apple and China can have very significant impacts on Apple. That's very clear. I would just say this isn't necessarily new to us. Obviously, this might be a new story, but we've seen the geopolitical relationship between the U.S. and China ebb and flow over the 10 years that I've covered Apple. Has it gotten more intense over the last, let's call it 5? Sure. But ultimately, we also do see, people coming back to the negotiating table. And so I don't think this is one directional, but it's absolutely true that Apple is very closely tied to China in producing iPhones and also selling a number of their products and services.
Let's pivot to another story that I think was in focus this week, a suggestion that Apple shares maybe had been moving higher because investors were starting to cheer the fact that they weren't spending nearly as much as some of the other hyperscalers on their whole AI build out, and what was oft criticized at the beginning is now being championed because we're suddenly worried about spend and return on investment.
So I guess two responses to that. One is, last time I was on after earnings, we talked about how OpEx is stepping up for Apple for spending on AI. So it might not be coming in the same form as the major hyperscalers, but they are spending. And then maybe the more important point here is there have been reports that Apple is going to white label Google Gemini as kind of the underlying driver of the next Apple intelligence platform, and basically paying Google $1 billion a year to do so. In the context of Google spending, I think it was $52 billion in CapEx in 2024, and just over $90 billion this year in CapEx to build out GCP and their AI capabilities. That's a pretty significant discount. That's a steal in some ways. And so we're basically saying that Apple is getting access to one of the leading large language models, foundation models from Google, for $1 billion a year for a company in Apple that generates over $400 billion annually, more than $1 billion a day. So yes, they're if this report is true, Apple is coming to kind of the AI party late, albeit with a capable product that they're spending a lot less on than a lot of their competitors.